Welcome to episode 36 of the See-Through Podcast, a podcast that creates transparency on disabilities and the champions with them. As always, I am your host, Lance Johnson, and I live, create, and podcast from Brooklyn, New York, with an eye condition called retinitis pigmentosa, or RP for short. Today, I have two lovely guests, Lainie and Estela, who are the two hosts of the Embrace It podcast, which if you haven't checked out yet, what are you waiting for? In fact, the Embrace It podcast shares a lot of common ground with the See-Through podcast, as it is also a podcast highlighting the disability community. So let me tell you a little bit more about Lainie and Estela before you hear our conversation. Lainie and Estela both wear leg braces due to chronic neuromuscular conditions, and they are both passionate about helping others feel confident in their own skin. And while they definitely do that with the Embrace It podcast, they also help others through other avenues. Lainie runs trendable.com, which is trend-able.com, which is a fashion blog that provides fashion inspiration for those who want to embrace their physical challenges of their disability. It's a super cool blog. Definitely go check it out. And Estela works for the Hereditary Neuropathy Foundation, which is a non-profit organization with a mission to increase awareness and accurate diagnosis of Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, or CMT for short, which is the disability both Lainie and Estela live with. In this episode, we cover all of this and more. It's definitely a great episode that I'm excited to put out there in the world. But before you hear my conversation with Lainie and Estela, make sure to follow or subscribe to the podcast. Also, make sure to follow the See-Through Podcast on social media. The handle is at See-Through-Pod. And all right, let's start this thing. Here's episode 36 with Lainie and Estela from the Embrace It podcast. Well, welcome Lainie and Estela from the Embrace It podcast. Thanks for talking with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Hi there.
Yeah, it's cool because I know you guys both host the podcast together, but you're not in the same location, right?
No, I am in Detroit area, and Estela is lucky enough to live near New York City. So we see each other more frequently on Zoom than ever before.
Yes.
Yeah.
We do.
It's the beauty of Zoom, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
I'm actually in New York. Well, I'm in Brooklyn.
There you go.
So not too far from you, Estela.
I like Brooklyn. I haven't been there in a while.
But yeah, thanks so much for talking with me today. I'm excited to have you. I have a lot of questions for you that we won't hit all of them, but we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, we'll do our best to answer them all.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, you both host the Embrace It podcast, but outside of that, you are, your own individual people. So I would love it.
No, we're not.
We share a brain.
Yeah.
We're just Embrace It. Yes.
Okay.
No, you're right. Absolutely. We have our own individual stuff, which is how we got together in the first place. So
Yeah, and I can't wait to talk about that too. But how about we just start to get everyone familiar with you? Maybe let's just start with an intro and who you are, what disability you have, and kind of what you're up to.
Cool. All right. So I'm Lainie, and I have a disease called Charcot-Marie-Tooth disorder. Estela, who will talk for herself, but she also has the same condition, which is kind of how we met. It is how we met. Charcot-Marie-Tooth is a neuromuscular condition, and there's many different kinds of it. For me, I have the most common type. And basically it affects my peripheral nerves, my hands and my feet only. It's slowly progressive. It's inherited for me. So my mother, who passed away, had it. One of my children have it. My sister has it. And I wear leg braces every day, which I didn't wear until I turned in my late 20s. And my hands, I have a lot of difficulty with fine motor stuff. But for the most part, I live my life, and I do live my life. And I have a website called Trendable. It's trend-able.com. And it's really about helping people who have disabilities, primarily people who have invisible type of disabilities and might wear leg braces or have other types of chronic conditions. And I help them to feel good about themselves, to find shoes and fashion, little tricks and hacks for being able to do everyday things in a different way, maybe, but still do them. So that's what I'm about and Trendable's about.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And I am Estela. I, like Lainie mentioned, we both have CMT. My story is a little different, where I showed symptoms very early in life and was wearing leg braces by kindergarten. And I have had no family history of it. So my sister and I were both diagnosed with it before the age of 4. But, our parents had no idea what it was, where it came from. It was kind of a spontaneous mutation. And so right away, they chose to be super proactive with it. And instead of kind of, being ashamed of it, they jumped right into becoming involved with Muscular Dystrophy Association and fundraising and events. And my sister and I were the poster children for Long Island for many years. And so we kind of grew up in this space of advocacy and involvement. And I pursued art and studied design. And a few years into that, realized that something was missing. And I started volunteering again as an adult and came across the Hereditary Neuropathy Foundation, which is the organization I work with now, and how I came across Lainie. And so we provide research and supportive programs for families living with CMT. And we take a really holistic approach to supporting our community, in that we understand that it's not just about the research and waiting for a cure, that it's also about providing valuable resources for people to use every day in their everyday lives, whether that's, like with Lainie mentioned, her adaptive fashion, whether that's with emotional wellness, finding doctors, physical therapy, adaptive exercise, all of these other, facets that make up someone's quality of life when they're living with a disability.
Also amazing. After, hearing both of you introduce yourself, I notice, there's some similarities, some kind of things that overlap between the both of you, but you didn't always know each other. I'm really curious about that. Like, how did you both meet each other and find each other?
Sure. Well, when I started Trendable, which was a really big deal for me because, like I mentioned, my disabilities are primarily invisible. So people in my everyday life, until I created this website and posted pictures of myself with the leg braces showing, people really didn't know that I had any physical challenges whatsoever. I mean, obviously people who are really close to me did, but most people didn't even know I wore leg braces and had any physical challenges. So I came out, so to speak, I put that in air quotes, when I launched this website 3 years ago. And when I launched it, obviously, since I have Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, these organizations, awesome ones like Hereditary Neuropathy Foundation, they're the main one, who really embraced me from the start. As it turned out, my 3 weeks after starting Trendable, my mother passed away, who also had CMT unexpectedly. And Estela and these new friends of mine who I only knew for such a few weeks, and who our only commonality at the time was really having this disease in all different shapes and forms. They embraced me and sent a basket, and we were instant friends from that point on. And they had me do a lot of stuff with them from that point on. Like I write for their newsletter. I tell people, give them as a resource to other people. And Estela and I from there just really clicked. She's 10 years younger than me, which
I don't look it, so we look the same exact age.
Whatever. She's my young, gorgeous friend who I am, it sounds cliche when people say, oh, I'm inspired by this person, but Estela, her physical challenges definitely are more than mine. I mean, it's all relative to the person, but she definitely, she doesn't stop, Estela, and she can do anything, and she hustles and she exercises, and it's amazing. And I knew I wanted to be connected to her. And so fast forward, before starting and Embrace It, we started doing workshops, and that's really what we love to do. The Embrace It podcast isn't, it's part of that, but really we do a lot of speaking engagements for communities, for people, for individuals, for groups of people, for organizations like Pinterest we were at and spoke to their staff members, for the Abilities Expo, et cetera. And we help people to really empower them to be able to advocate for themselves as people with disabilities. So with that, assertiveness training, being able to ask for help, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And I was instantly, I gravitated towards Lainie just because she had this background in social work, right? And I always loved psychology, but I never approached it in such a way that Lainie did. Her first workshop for H&F, we did a summit on behavioral health, and she just put together this super fun and dynamic workshop with role playing about how to communicate when you have a disability. And, it just brought this whole new fresh approach of giving the power back to our patient community, because a lot of times, we get stuck in poor me, I'm disabled. I have all this shame. We don't realize how much shame we have around our disabilities sometimes, especially when we grow up with a rare disability that a lot of people don't know about. So it's hard to talk about it. But Lainie just presented it in this super fun way. And she's kind of demonstrated the different styles of communication, passive aggressive, assertive, and how, what that looked like in, with somebody with a disability, having a conversation with someone, we use the example a lot of times, we get asked all the time, what's wrong with your legs growing up? So how can we take a fresh approach to digesting a question like that that can be so offensive in many ways, and that can really trigger a lot of emotions in people. I had a lot of growth just by learning from Lainie and understanding and breaking down and having that reflection of I can approach this question in a much healthier way. I can use this as a teaching moment. We built on that, and we're a good team.
We are a great team, and the biggest focus is really telling people that you really don't have control over other people and teaching them what they do have control over. And in that example that Estela said with what's wrong with your feet, I grew up, and when someone would notice my feet, because I did a lot to hide it, when they did notice if I was tired and I was limping and they're like, what's wrong with your feet? My reaction was not good. It was, I don't know if you swear on your podcast, but it was basically like anger, and that's how a lot of people with disabilities and people in general tend to respond to things that make them uncomfortable and embarrassed. And so we tell people it's really about how you feel when you're speaking, whatever they think or feel as a result, that's a byproduct. But the most important thing is how you feel about yourself in that moment.
Okay. Yeah, I agree completely. Lainie, where you're coming from, and you, Estela, but Lainie, you have Trendable, which is your blog for clothing and fashion inspo for the disability community, and specifically targeted to other people with CMT or just other disabilities?
No. I have lots and lots of people. Most of the people who follow me have disabilities of all different kinds, MS, lupus, everything under the sun.
Okay.
And it's not just fashion. It's also just like
lifestyle,
like going to, if you go to, it's things that I do, like people who like traveling, going on a cruise, for example. Now, someday, maybe people can go again. Like, how do you navigate that if your balance sucks? How do you go to a resort pool? If
wedding.
you have a mobility device, how can you go to a wedding and not sit in a corner, but still be able to have an appetizer? It's like basic everyday stuff for people who want to live like everyone else, and not avoid things, because that's what we both, Estela and I both encourage is not avoiding. And, you know, we do encourage people to know their limits, but not to say no automatically, like I can't, because although we all can't do everything, we can do anything in a different way, you know?
Amazing. And for those listening who want to check out Trendable, it's the URL is trend-able.com. Yeah, okay. So you started that blog and that lifestyle advice website, and Estela, you also work for the Hereditary Neuropathy Organization.
Yeah. So we call H&F for short, and
H&F, okay.
And hnf-cure.org is the URL. But yeah, we try and provide as many resources as we can to families. And a lot like Lainie, I'm always trying to document things in my life that I find beneficial and then share that with others. I'm kind of like the guinea pig, in certain ways of trying out new technologies or new types of braces, and, sharing what works and what doesn't.
All right, cool. So that's both of your backgrounds. And then through those backgrounds, your paths just seemed to cross at some point in time. I believe it. You said, Lainie, it was when your mother passed. Was your intro to Estela?
Yes, right before, because the Charcot-Marie tooth is what H&F organization focuses on, and I would be at the time a micro influencer who was just getting started, and they embraced me and were like, please work with us. And another organization that also helps people with the same disease wasn't as like, we love you, we want you. They were more like, how are you going to hurt us? And this is a world about helping people, and H&F really helps people and cares about people. And I love what they do. And I love the holistic approach to helping people with Charcot-Marie tooth disorder. And where we take it with embrace it is not just for people with Charcot-Marie tooth disorder, but obviously a lot of people who have our disease have never ever met anybody who has it. And they look at Estela and I and they're like, wow, she can do that. Maybe I can do that. And that's what it's about. And then all the other people who follow with different disabilities can relate to a whole bunch of different things that we cover, from dating with a disability to, we called it like seasonal self-pity syndrome, like in the summer, which we're entering now. And it's 90 degrees here in Michigan this weekend. And for someone, for other people, summer is like, oh my God, I'm so excited. And I love summer. I'm happy to not be in the winter. But there's a lot of anxiety for people who have disabilities around that. If you have young children playing in a park, not having an 8-hour day of school to keep your kids occupied, having to go to places like the zoo and places that you have to walk far or not walk if you're in a wheelchair. And how do you navigate those things and not feel guilty, but still be the best person, mom, dad, whatever that you can be. So, yeah.
Cool. So it sounds like from both of your backgrounds, you eventually found each other, formed a friendship, and then had a light bulb kind of situation where, hey, we should start a podcast. And then that's how the Embrace It podcast began.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. We just figured we were having these conversations between the two of us as two friends that got each other, we have the same disease. So we get a lot of those nuances that not everyone gets. So why not share that with other members of the community that don't have that, right? So they kind of feel like part of our tribe.
Amazing. And yeah, what you just talked about, like how you cover basically no disabilities like off the table, right? And that's what the See-Through podcast does. And that's why you caught my eye. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. They're doing kind of what I'm doing, but, have the different perspective on it. So I think there's a lot of overlap here. So I think it's super cool. And I do agree. I think, and maybe correct me if you disagree, but I do think that disability communities like can sometimes be cliquey. Like you only talk to people with your specific disability, and you don't really consider, like, if you're someone who is visually impaired, you're not really going to talk to someone, let's say, with CMT, and think that there's similarities. I mean, you would if you sat and thought about it, but like just naturally, I don't think you're going to be inclined to connect with other disability groups. So that was kind of my idea with starting the See-Through podcast, was like, I'll talk to everyone. And then if you're listening to these conversations, you'll soon realize that, there's similar accessibility issues and challenges, and that everyone has a lot more in common than they thought they did. Would you agree or disagree?
Totally.
Yeah, 1,000%. I think that's kind of what we were thinking too, because a lot of times with our community, we're very tight, right? But we all of our, all of these different areas of disability have so much overlap. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes we duplicate efforts, right? Because we're providing something for one group and not realizing that it can apply to other groups as well. So I think we started off with interviewing people from the CMT community, and then soon we realized, like, there's this whole other world of disability that we really should branch out into. And there's so much we have to learn from each other. And, accessibility is accessibility, so I want to learn from the vision impaired community on what we can do to, be more inclusive on our ends with our website and our social media. And, we all need to work together on this concept of inclusivity, because, as an organization, we have to be inclusive too of all different types of disability to really maximize our resources and our influence on making a more accessible world.
Also, I have found that a lot of the groups online and those that meet in person tend to be a lot of self-pity and like comparing, like, I don't know, what's it called? Like war, like comparing symptoms and like the negative parts of everything. And it's like, if you sit around long enough and you're with people who are, like with anything, you sit around with people complaining, it definitely affects you, and it makes you have anxiety about things you might not have even thought about. And what we love about the podcast is that, you can just be an individual taking a walk in your car, whatever, and you're hearing positivity, you're hearing like actual tips. And we want every episode to be that people walk away with something, that it's not just, we're not sitting there talking about like what we did last night. If we do, it's for 2 seconds, we want people to walk away and be like, oh, wow, if I go to an amusement park, like that's a really good idea. I could get to the front of the line, but not feel bad, or like whatever, and that's an important thing. Support groups, and all of the stuff that keeps people in a little box of their same disease or whatever, it's hard to grow from that. And by the way, there are some that are great, but for the most part, I don't like them. Every time I go on, I'm like, oh my God, should I have that ache and pain?
Yeah.
How come I don't have that? And then you start to feel it. It's like when someone gets stung by a bee, it's like, oh my God, I'm like, ow, but I didn't get stung,
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, I'm trying to create value for my listeners. Like, if you're listening, I hope you take something from what I talk about versus just getting to know me. This isn't like the Lance Johnson podcast. Mm-hmm. It's not the Lainie and Estela podcast where you're like a public figure, and
right.
He's just talking about your life. What's kind of neat about it though is that like your personality does get to come out through that, and people do get to know you, but also at the same time, they're learning too. Which is kind of like, that's kind of the goal. I think people have to like you, I think, to want to listen to you. But I think you both seem very likable, so I'm sure that's not an issue.
Estela more so than myself. That's why. There has to be a good cop, bad guy. Yeah. Okay. Anyway.
Yeah. But I know what you're talking about in terms of negativity, and I listened to episode 1 of Embrace It, and
oh God, I'm sorry. I don't think I could bring myself to listen to.
I don't think I heard it. Oh my God.
And what I picked up from it, and what I loved from it was, you talk about something similar. You talk about how there's like, on the one hand, you're talking about negativity and how it's, you're not a big fan of it. Just these support groups who focus on symptoms and pity parties and things like that. But also on the opposite side of that, there's something to me equally as toxic. I guess I don't like using that word, but there's like the toxic positivity where it's just like, everything's fine. Enjoy your day. Be happy you're here. Yeah. And I think keeping it real is something that I try to do. And I think you even say that in your first episode is you're keeping it real and admitting the hardships, but also admitting too that you can do stuff about it.
Right.
And there's physical challenges, but there's also mental challenges, and they're equally important. And if not mentally, I think what I'm kind of learning through doing this podcast is that the mental challenges of a disability sometimes can weigh on you more than the physical aspects of disability.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's one thing to have a physical disability, but to have emotional, mental, or mindset disability is far more dangerous and debilitating, I feel,
Honestly, like, not having disabilities is not a walk in the park. You know what I mean? Like, it's not all rainbows and whatever, lollipops. It's not easy. And we want to acknowledge that. Like, we don't say, oh, just get back up. Like, you're fine.
Brush it off.
Like, Estela and I, for example, were in San Francisco when we went to go do the podcast not the podcast.
Workshop.
We did the Prentice workshop and another one in that city. And, Estela, has challenges getting up like a bus, for example, like stairs and a bus, like many people. Right. Mm-hmm. And, her legs are weak and her hands are weak, and not that mine are so awesome, but like, I do not have difficulties with stairs. And so I was like pushing Estela up, and not once does Estela say like, I'm not going to do it. She does say this is really hard, but the point is that she gives it her all. And she knows it's embarrassing at times to feel like you're slowing someone down behind you or whatever. And it's hard. And there's lots of anxiety around it. She makes jokes about it. She makes people around her feel okay, because they can see she's okay. And that's what we're trying to really encourage people, is like, be able to like acknowledge it. Don't pretend, even though I have an invisible disability and I choose not to show my leg braces every day, because that's a choice I make, I still can talk openly about having it. So we want people to be able to speak about what they have. It's not, it's not something to be embarrassed about or to feel bad about. It's just something to just be like, wow, like, you can do that. Like, I have this, this, and this. You inspired me to do this because you can do that. Everyone has something, and that's what we really emphasize.
Yeah. And we really try drill down the message of self empathy, right? It's like that's kind of like 101. You need to not internalize the disability as something that's wrong with you. It's just you do things in a different way, and sometimes you need to ask for help, and that's okay, right? It's how you ask for help. It's how you feel about asking for help, because it's all in that self-communication and that self-talk that we're able to move forward and to form relationships that are healthy, and pursue careers that we want to pursue, and go to events that we want to go to. So it's all about self-empathy, and that applies to every single disability across the board. And something else we talk about is that some disabilities are progressive, right? And that we are it's not just like, okay, I've made peace with my disability, I'm done. Now this is a practice. This is something that I am constantly having to work out. Lainie's constantly trying to work on. There may be things that I'm able to do that a year from now I can't do, and I constantly have to hold space for myself in order to process that loss and that grief and whatever other emotions come up with that, right? So it's a practice, and I think that we are learning as much from anyone else, from our guests, and the more of this type of work that we do than anyone else. So I do it a lot for selfish reasons, because there are these amazing people that I want to connect to, and I want to hear their stories, and I want to know their secrets, and I want to know what projects they're working on, and it's just like the perfect way to do that.
Yeah, I say that all the time too. I kind of feel selfish when I do this podcast, because like people probably listen and like, oh, Lance, he's just such a giving person doing this podcast for the people.
He's not.
It's not. Yeah, I get so much out of these conversations because I learn so much from other people, and then also it gives me a kind of like an open format to share my experience, and then just through talking about it, I can maybe wrap my head around my own perspective of things a little better. So it's almost in a way like therapeutic for me. So
1,000%. And a lot of times we collaborate afterwards with our guests. We figure out that we have projects in common or things that we can work on and build together. So we'd love to hear about what you have in the works, Lance. We've been talking so much about ourselves, but what do you have up and coming that we can kind of share with our community?
Well, it makes sense that we'd hear from you, People hear enough about me from other episodes. But yeah, I'm just getting really heavily involved in this podcast. I just hit the year mark. I have a lot of interviews coming up. I'm trying to get prepared for the next, I guess, stage of the podcast. I'm working on a lot of new material and trying to get some projects off the ground with the podcast. I'm being vague about it because I don't have the details ironed out completely.
That's okay.
So I don't want to
Well, we're going to just have to have you on Embrace It, I think, is the deal. So
okay,
when the new projects manifest, we will book you on. Then you can Then you can tell about what you're doing and whatnot.
Yeah, but I would love to be on your podcast, and I think my perspective is kind of what you just described as, some disabilities are progressive, and I have a progressive eye disease called retinitis pigmentosa, or RP for short. So basically what that RP is my peripheral vision's kind of diminishing from like the outside in. So it's like, in a sense, like tunnel vision is how people describe it. And then also it involves the retina. So my eyes don't really adapt to changes in light, specifically the dark. So it's a symptom is like night blindness. Like in the dark, it just eyes won't adapt to it. So like most people, if you're laying in bed at night, you can kind of see details in your room, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
With night blindness, it's just your eyes don't really adjust. So it makes kind of dimly lit restaurants, movie theaters, walking at night. That kind of can be problematic, and then you pair it with the diminished peripheral vision, which eventually can lead to total blindness. But yeah, most people with RP are legally blind by age 40.
Oh, wow.
And my mom is legally blind, so I inherited it from her. But yeah, that's a little bit of background on me. I don't know if that helps you, but I guess I want to go back to my point is the fact that it's progressive. Like right now, I'm doing okay. Like I can't complain, like I take the subway in New York. I work as a video editor, which is heavily based on vision. But, I know where it's going, I know where it's leading me based on my mother's vision, and just talking with, I've had a bunch of guests on my podcast who have RP, and just the general trajectory of where RP takes you. I kind of am mentally preparing for becoming legally blind at some point in my life. And, that as of now, I'm adapting daily in terms of learning new tips and tricks to kind of navigate the world. But it's more of a mental thing for me in terms of adjusting what my thoughts of what my future holds, and will I be able to do my career? How long can I edit video? How long can I get around New York City without a cane? So those are things like that. Will my children inherit RP? That type of thing. So those are
that with every condition, obviously that's progressive and whatnot, you have those unknowns, and there's definitely a balance that has to be achieved. Like, I think it's smart, like, to be prepared as much as you can be prepared. But I also think you don't know what's going to happen in life. Like, my mom had the same disease as I did, and she died from diaphragm weakness. The flu was what killed her, but this disease that I have, my type and her type, technically in the beginning, they said it didn't affect that. It affects your hands and your feet. But what we know is that muscle weakness and nerve weakness, if you don't keep things strong, the things that you can, like, I can't do anything about my nerves, like they're dead, right? But if I do the things with the muscles around them and keep those strong and those compensate, like, it doesn't mean that my life is going to be, that my lungs or my breathing will be affected. Everyone, I think even with any condition, like, you don't know what's going to happen, what advances there could be, right, what you can do in the moment, how, you could be in a car accident tomorrow. People don't. And so we really don't want people to be like naive and be like, oh, I'm not going to be running a marathon, right? Like, there's not going to be in this lifetime any point where I will run, period, but let alone, run a mile. But, I hope to always walk. And that is, I have to work at that like anything else. Like, I have to keep strong. I have to keep moving. I have to, do everything I can to keep my body strong so the disease doesn't take over.
Right. But I think it's great, Lance, that you're connecting with other people from the RP, because I find that comforting for me too, is to have this growing circle of, women that inspire me, that no matter what happens with my body, I know I can still make such a positive impact on the world, whether you can see, whether you can walk, whether you're mobile at all. I think we, now with this digital age, I think it's becoming more and more apparent of how we can just use our minds and our creativity and our imaginations to really make impactful change, right? And when we're advocates for that change, that's when things happen, because no one is going to fight for this change more than people like you and I in the disability community that are living the experience and knows what needs to be improved with accessibility and equality and representation, all of these things that make our world more inclusive. So, that part of the mindset for me is like, yeah, I might not be able to walk in 5 years from now, but I'm constantly in the process of making peace with that and understanding that doesn't define my worth, right? It doesn't define your worth, whether or not you are legally completely blind or not. Like, there are people in this world doing amazing things with what they have, and it's just keeping that mindset that is not being disabled, is keeping that healthy mindset of, just moving forward regardless of what our bodies limit us to.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Sometimes though, like, I'll be honest, like, since I've talked to so many people with RP, and some of them are completely blind from it, and then I am walking around New York and editing video, and sometimes I feel like a little bit of like a imposter syndrome, a little bit, where I'm like, who am I to be the voice of RP? And I say that all the time because I want to be open with anyone who listens, that like, I'm coming from the perspective of someone newly diagnosed, and it's just trying to wrap my head around, my future and just the disability community as a whole, because I don't know, it interests me, and like we talked about earlier, selfishly it helps me wrap my head around it. So I will say this: thanks to you both for doing the same thing with your listeners. So
yeah, and
awesome.
I like that. I mean, I think that's really honest, and I think that's real, and we just have to keep in mind that you can't compare yourself to anybody, and even though you're not legally blind at this time, there's a lot that people, can get from your experiences where you're at right now. Mm-hmm. Like someone, it's like comparing pain. It's like, okay, well, yeah, like someone else is in a wheelchair. I'm not. Like, how are they? I mean, one would assume, oh, that person in a wheelchair has a lot more to deal with, but you don't know what goes on in someone else. You don't know about someone else's resources, someone else's emotional stuff, someone else's support systems, money, like all of that plays a part into how we can, live with disabilities. And
and we say it all the time, we're the experts of our own experience, right? So that's the value and the work, the value of storytelling is sharing from our point of view, from our personal experience. And that's all this big, beautiful rainbow spectrum of disability is. We're not all the same. And that's why we all really need to bring our voices to the table, because there is so much diversity within disability that all of it needs to be heard, so that we can break these barriers that are existing. Because I don't know about your disability, and you don't necessarily know about mine, but through discussions like this, there's common ground, and there's synchronicity, and there's things that we can work on together. And
I love that. Yeah, see, this is what it's about right here.
Absolutely.
But I love what you're doing with the Embrace It podcast. I was looking earlier, you're at episode, 22, 21?
We'll be launching 22.
Wow.
In about a week or two, yeah.
If you're listening, go check that out. You can follow Estela and Lainie's podcast, Embrace It podcast on Instagram. The handle is at @embraceit_podcast. You have a very beautiful Instagram feed, by the way.
Thank you.
Estela, that's all Estela. She's younger. She can manage multiple social media accounts. I only stick with 3.
And then on top of that, if you want to access the trendable.com that we discussed earlier, and also the HNF organization?
HNF-cure.org for anyone living with CMT, Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease. Lots of resources on there.
Yeah. So I will have links to all of that in the show description. So just click the show description and explore those. Get to know Estela and Lainie even more.
Thank you.
They have a ton of episodes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I could talk to you both for hours.
Well, luckily we'll get another episode when you come on our podcast. So
exactly, yeah.
We'll have some more time to do that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Count me in.
Yes.
On the record.
Awesome.
Awesome.
But before I close out the episode, this is something that I do with each episode is I let my guests give a shout out to a nonprofit or charity or just any organization. It could be, it could be like Tesla cars if you wanted. Like it could be whatever you want. But yeah, do you have anything in mind?
Well, I get to go because I don't work for HNF, but I am again going to shout them out because they really have helped me and many other people. So that's my shout out again to Hereditary Neuropathy Foundation, HNF.
Yay. Thank you, Lainie. Since we already covered HNF, we have a new partner, NTI at Home. They are an organization that connects people with disabilities with virtual employment from home. So they have been growing exponentially during the pandemic, and they are helping to keep a lot of people working. And they do job training and help with accessible equipment for the home, everything needed to help people with disabilities thrive and stay independent.
Amazing. Yeah. And again, if you want to explore the two organizations just discussed, click the show description. I'll have links there. Yeah. Thanks for sharing those. And I mean, I don't know. Is that, you want to say that's it? Is that our episode?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. I think I really appreciate having you on here. It's been super fun, and it's definitely a different mix for Elaine and I to be on the other end of the podcast and sharing our story. But yeah, we really appreciate all the work that you're doing, and I hope we can continue to work together and collaborate and inspire other people to come on board and share their stories.
I was just going to say ditto. Ditto.
Yeah, I've been on a few other podcasts, and it does feel very weird to be on the other end. I'm like, man, I'm talking a lot.
Yeah. Well, we talk a lot in general.
No, I talk a lot.
Oh, well, you said great things. Thanks for talking with
Thank
me.
you.
And I'm excited for this episode to come out. And but until we talk again, thanks again for coming on the See-Through podcast.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks, Lance.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
And there you have it, episode 36, featuring Lainie and Estela from the Embrace It podcast. If this was your introduction to Lainie and Estela, I'm glad I could introduce you. So definitely go check out their podcast. If you want a quick way to access their podcast, just click on the show description. There you can access trendable.com. You can also learn more about the Hereditary Neuropathy Foundation. And if you haven't yet, do me a favor and follow or subscribe to this podcast on whatever streaming platform you're listening on. And if you want to access a lot of cool content that I put out, make sure to follow this podcast on social media. The handle is @SeeThroughPod. And if you want to get in touch with me directly, feel free to DM me on social media. You can also email me. My email address is theseethroughpodcast@gmail.com. I'm super thankful for everyone listening. Thank you so much. And until next episode, stay transparent.